Let's talk about being local. I think just as compelling storytelling is important, to what craft brewers are doing and how they define their brand. So too is, capitalizing, and Michael touched on this a bit in his talk, on this growing consumer shift towards supporting local business. We wanted to have a discussion about, where that trend of being local is going, and how some breweries are using that to their advantage, and how they play in the local space. Obviously, local is not just unique to craft. Craft has been the obvious beneficiary of this more global trend towards local in many different areas. But as beer companies begin to spread their wings and move away from home, how do you maintain a focus not only on your local core market, but sort of take that spirit and bring it to a new place? So we've invited Alan Newman, Josh Deth, and John Laffler to come and talk a little bit about local. Alan is the president of Alchemy Science. Josh is one of the founding managing partners in Revolution Brewing, and John is the founder of Off Color. So guys, come on up and let's chat for a bit about local. It's okay to applaud. Welcome.
Cool. Thanks. Sweet, I get the middle.
Into the bright lights now, guys. Alan, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. So I just want everyone to be, familiar with who you guys are and what you guys are about. So we'll kind of go down the line, start with Alan. Talk to me a little bit about your business, how you guys connect and interact with the local beer scene at Alchemy Science, and then kind of move down the line.
So I'm starting from a place where people understand that I'm a wholly owned subsidiary of Boston Beer, and that I operate at arm's length from them. And without Jim, I could never do what I'm doing. Our task was, how do we keep more beer drinkers coming into the craft beer space? How do we get them to enjoy our beers? Not so much the ones that are already in here, but how do we bring new people in? And so looking at the situation, local is really an interesting way to go, and it happens to be, I think, one of my strengths. I love building local communities. That's really how Magic Hat started, with just building a local community, and then it just kind of grew. So each one of the breweries is very different from each other. Each one develops beers that we believe are aimed at the taste profile of that community. Each one has different brewers, different staffs, and they're all focused on their individual market. And to me, that's what makes what we're doing really special, really interesting, and what I kind of love doing.
So you're letting the market dictate the kinds of products that you produce.
Yeah.
And John, how about for you? I mean, you have a brand that's distributed, pretty widely available in a lot of states, but you're doing some interesting things here in Chicago that are unique to just this market.
Yeah, so we're a small brewery here in Chicago. We did about 3,000 barrels last year, which is a drop in the bucket compared to a lot of the breweries here, who are very large and awesome. What we do, which I think is interesting, is we have a strange distribution model where we sell beer in Chicago, and we sell about maybe 6% of our volume here in Chicago. And we sell beer to the national market, so we're in most major metropolitan areas in the country. Not all of them, but most. But we don't sell any beer regionally. So any state that touches Illinois, we don't sell any beer in whatsoever. For us, that's important because we want this sense of otherness. Local is important to us here, but I mean, at a certain point we have to acknowledge that local is a marketing strategy. And for here, it matters to us because we're a city brewery. I live here in the city. Everyone that works for us lives in the city, and it's something that is very near and dear to our hearts. But when we go out and sell beer in New York, we don't have that. We don't have that little sticker at the Whole Foods that says local. So how are we going to sell our beer there? Why does anyone care? For us, the way that we go about doing that is by embracing the sense of otherness. We're not local. We're something different. We're something esoteric. We're something other. It also allows us to have more creative and artistic freedom with the beers that we produce. We don't have to worry about, all right, let's make this bizarro 10.5% smoked juniper beer from this small island off the coast of Norway. We don't have to worry about selling a lot of that beer here in Chicago. We can worry about selling a little bit of that beer in a lot of other areas. Really learned that technique from Ron Jeffries at Jolly Pumpkin, and it's worked very, very well for us.
And Josh, I would say that, totally different from John in that you guys are very regional, still, primarily selling most of your beer here in Chicago, but selling a lot of beer here in Chicago and, really kind of striving towards that regional brewery status or that, regional icon, if you will. How's the Revolution business so far and, what's ahead for you guys?
We still don't sell any beer in any states that touch Illinois, but yeah, we're regional in the sense that we're very local. We're hyper local. We're close and deep in our market. This is a huge beer market, and business is great. We've been brewing at capacity, selling as much beer as we can. We've got a crazy expansion project. A few people were at the brewery last night. Maybe got to go in the back and see that taking shape. So yeah, business is strong, and we are very different than John's model, where we also sell in the state of Ohio with Cavalier Distributing, and there we're kind of not so local. We're regional relevance, but local is huge for us. It's a big part of our success, and it's something that we don't have to shout it. People just kind of figure it out. I think it matters most what local means to consumers rather than what it really means to us.
Right.
We don't do a lot of aggressive marketing, and I think mainly the whole revolution thing, people often ask me what's in the name, where did it come from? And a lot of it is the beer revolution, and it's driven by the consumers. They're glomming onto our beer to be a part of the revolution, to join in. They want something they can connect with. They want to visit the brewery and see the big hairy brewers that are brewing their beer and the sights and the smells, and they want to take it with them on a road trip to their cousin in some other place and say, have you tried this beer? It's great.
Right.
And the vice versa, the cousin does it back to them.
So local, it seems, is an experience then for a lot of consumers. Alan, what's been your experience interacting with the different consumers now in New York and Miami and LA? You said all of them very different. Totally different. So what have you learned from that process?
Neighborhood breweries turn on its neighborhood to good tasting beer, is what I've learned. It doesn't matter if they're Mexican American, Asian American, South American, none of that matters. Where there's a local brewery that they can come and they can touch and they can smell and they can hear the stories that Michael was talking about, that's how they get excited about craft beer. Once they have that experience, they now have trouble going back. And they're now ready to look out and say, okay, what else is out there? But that initial contact of having a place for them to come and experience what we do in making craft beer, smell the aroma, taste the different styles, understand that beer is not single style, that there's everything from Berliner Weisses to stouts to barrel-aged, and that is my experience of why local is so important, and what it is we're trying to do in our local areas is really connect with those customers. And the three breweries, in LA, we have a huge Mexican-American population, a huge Asian-American population. In Miami, we have a huge South American and Cuban population. In New York, Coney Island is, just this weird place. So the way we interact, the goal is always the same. How do we find ways of talking to those customers, giving them an experience that will make us special for them, not just so that they'll appreciate our brand, but they'll appreciate the craft beers.
Right. Giving them that experience is one thing. Putting it on a package and hoping that that experience will carry into an off-premise retail location or a bar where there's 15 other local brands on tap is another. So how are you guys going about that, taking the experience that they might have at Revolution or at Off Color and providing that when they're not there, providing that to consumers when they're not in your breweries?
I think this local thing is as much about authenticity and transparency to the consumer. Obviously local means close, in a geographic sense. I came from a community background in affordable housing work, community development. I ran a local farmers market, which to me is like the great example of the local trend that craft beer and farmers markets are both growing around the same time, the whole local food movement. You see the community come out there. It's a very inefficient, we were talking earlier about inefficiencies and stuff like that. There's great inherent inefficiencies in a farmer's market, but you also have the farmer dealing direct to the consumer, which is what we do at our tap room and our brew pub. And so I just think like we don't have to market local, like the word local isn't on our can. Our address is, they can come to the brewery anytime. And I think the consumers, I really don't like it when people kind of try to put the wool over the consumer's eyes and pretend like a beer is made somewhere else. Or, I think people are very smart and they're hip to that. A big part of our success is people finding out where we are and who we are, doing their little bit of research to make themselves comfortable about it, and feeling comfortable themselves about it. And our job is to continually impress them, bring out new beers, be consistent, give them the beers that they want, but that getting them to buy into the whole thing and connect with it, they'd make those decisions themselves, and you got to kind of let that happen. You can't control everything.
Alan, I can see you're just chomping at the bit right now. You guys are making beer, local brands in a place where you're not local, right?
We make beer in 6 different breweries, yes.
Yeah. So what's that process been like, trying to tell that story? And I guess, as Josh puts it, I mean, are you pulling the wool over people's eyes when you sell a package that says, Concrete Beach, Miami, but it was brewed in Pennsylvania or Cincinnati?
And it clearly states on there, brewed in collaboration with Boston Beer Company. Yeah. There's not an article that's ever been written about any one of our projects that doesn't start off with a subsidiary of Boston Beer.
Right.
We are about as transparent as I know how to be. It is something I'm actually quite proud of. I appreciate the resources that I have behind me, and everybody giggles about the money. It's not the money. It's the skills, the ancillary services that I can call on. And I have always, you know me a long time, I have no memory. And so what I've learned is if I'm trying to remember a story, it doesn't work. So I always try to be as transparent and tell the truth as I can. And my experience is that when you tell the truth to the consumer, they just don't care. What they respond to is you're telling them the truth. And if you tell it with some passion and enthusiasm, they embrace it. Does that mean there aren't people out there who will never touch one of my beers? Of course there are. Those aren't my customers, so I don't really care. I really focus on my customers and trying to give my customers an experience that hopefully will be valuable to them.
Right. So, John, I mean, as you guys start to grow, and you guys are small now, what are your aspirations for growth? And I guess, do you ever see your particular business model changing in a way that might impact your ability to be sort of local in the way that you are now, with brands that you don't sell, that are unique to Chicago? As you guys grow, do you ever see that changing?
We definitely make beers that we can't make enough of in order to supply it to everybody. It just doesn't make sense to send a half a case of beer to California. It just doesn't make sense. As we can make more beer, then that changes. But for us, we try to focus on the internet bringing everybody together. The internet changed everything about beer. Also, beer became very global. We talked earlier, and we have a lot of internal discussions about this sort of pendulum swing between global and local. And for us, just naturally, when everyone's going one direction, we're going to go in the other direction, just because we're kind of squirrely like that. Our brewery is in the middle of nowhere in Chicago. We don't have a tap room. When people come up on their bikes, we very nicely ask them to leave. So it's really the antithesis of community building. For us, it's about the artistry of what we're trying to do and trying to push what beer is forward. It's kind of a heady, kind of self-indulgent aesthetic, but it's us, and that's who we are. As we can make more and more beer, as we grow, obviously things do start to change. And the way that we sell beer, the way that we interact with the community will change with that as well.
So how do you see it evolving? Do you have a vision of where things will head?
I think off-site tap rooms do make a lot of sense. I don't want a whole bunch of people at our brewery because it's small, and then there are lots of people walking around, and we don't have the money, we don't want the resources, nor don't want to spend the money and resources in order to retrofit a building in order to make that viable for us. Right. For us, it just doesn't make sense. The outside tap room, there's a lot to be said about how Josh runs his business, and learned a lot about how to run a business from watching what Revolution has done and the vast success that they've had. Anybody in Chicago has watched that. But you have to take some things from it and other things that make sense. And if there are a lot of brew pubs, then we're not going to have a brew pub. That's just the end of it for us.
Right. So in areas of the country where craft brewers can't touch their consumers so closely and have them come to the brewery and give them this experience, this local experience, how do those brands, how should they think about the localness of craft and being a part of the local community if that experience just isn't an option for them?
The internet. I mean, you reach into your phone. It's right there. They can interact with you directly. I'm on my phone all day long.
Alan, if you couldn't, directly interface with your consumers in Miami or LA, how would you take those brands to market?
That's a great question. Back in the old days, it was relatively easy. You could get your beer on tap at a bar. If you sold, they would keep selling it. We had a large sales force. Our salespeople would go into those bars and they'd sit and talk to the customers. Talk a little bit about the beer, but talk more about the company, talk more about what we stood for, what we were trying to accomplish, and literally, sell the brand one pint at a time. And then we just grew exponentially, and it continued. You can't do that today. There are very few bars that you can stay on long enough to develop a brand following. I don't know the answer. I listened to Michael earlier and just, realized how inadequate I am. We have some great stories. Our breweries are just filled with fabulous stories about passionate, enthusiastic people who love what we do and try to bring innovation and quality to everything we do. And we do a piss-poor job of getting that out to the world. We've really focused on, building the local community, and we've really focused on taking care of those people in the local community to help them know us, feel us, learn about us. But how you do that as you spread in today's world, I don't know.
Yeah, it definitely seems like a challenge as breweries become, get to the point where they're becoming less and less local as they grow. How do you sort of strike the chord between being that local brand or, because there's always going to be somebody more local than you, no matter, who you are or how big or small you are. There's always somebody that's down the street that's more local to somebody else. So how far does it extend, and what does it mean, and how long will local, be this thing that, this trend that people are so attached to?
For us, it's, I totally agree. Local these days, Chicago is this great city of neighborhoods, and we used to have practically a brewery in every neighborhood, and there's the corner tavern was the place you went to get your fresh beer at the turn of the century. And it's starting to come back to that. And we know we're not the most local brewery in most everywhere except for our neighborhood. And we sell a ton of beer at the bars right in Logan Square in our neighborhood around the brewery. It used to be, I know when I worked at Goose Island way back in the day, and they were started as a brew pub and went into production. A lot of the local bars were afraid and didn't really want to take on the local beer. They felt it was a brew pub was competition to them, whereas for us, it's a lot of the bars in our neighborhood are benefiting from the growth in craft beer, and they see us as a pioneer, and they want to be associated with us and other breweries like John's that are also doing it locally. We're in the same neighborhood, but I think for the places where you're not so local, it's about for us, we're a big growing brewery. Chain stores, having your beer in the right place that people are shopping. Like my favorite customer is the person that beer does not consume their life, and I want to sell to them. So how do I do that? Maybe at the grocery store shelf, the new neighborhood in the suburbs, the new neighborhood suburban beer might be closer and more local, but odds are they're not on the shelf today. Maybe they're going to try to get there. Some of the bigger chain stores like Mariano's in the Chicago area take in some, we'll work with a small local brewery and say, hey, you can sell at a couple stores here. We'll let you self-distribute to a chain store, and they'll sign their invoices at the back door they can drop 3-4 cases at a time, which is innovative, I think, for those small breweries. But for us, it's showing relevance. I'm comparing to Sierra Nevada, New Belgium, Lagunitas, Bell's, Goose Island on the shelf in a suburban chain store in Chicago, and I think I win that one in terms of local, if that's what you care about. Right. For us, it's local isn't everything. It's just one factor. You got to have great beer, good packaging, good marketing, consistency, all those things.
Right. So, one of the questions that I wanted to ask all you guys is, and you sort of touched on it there, is that there's a lot of breweries out there now sort of beating that local drum. We're local, support us because we're local. And at times, from where I'm sort of sitting, it seems almost like a crutch. Like they don't have much else to go on other than being local, so they're really relying on that being the sell. Is local something you can build a brand on, or does there have to be something else? And if so, how do you find that? And to Michael's point, I guess, how do you find your voice?
My biggest surprise, when we opened Angel City, I just assumed everybody wanted local and everybody was going to be calling us to get our beer and put it on draft and put it into their shops. And not only did that not happen, most people didn't give a flying. So I agree with what Josh just said. It has value, but it is not the end all and be all. In order to be successfully locally, you have to deliver. You have to deliver on the quality of the beer and the consistency of the quality of that beer. You've got to deliver on the service. When they order it, they need to be getting it. You need to be putting a story behind that localness. Because as you said, every city has 30 locals now. And as Josh said, there's always somebody more local. So I think that it's a card that gets you into a game. It's not a huge game. And then the question is that we're working on, and how do we then bring more meaning to what it is that we're doing in our local brewery that's different than everybody else? How do we create value for what we're doing in a way that the customer will understand? And how do you translate that onto your packaging, onto your point of sale, into social media? These are all, I think that we're all trying to figure it out these days, because 5 years ago, this didn't matter.
Right. Clearly there's something there if Anheuser-Busch is going out and acquiring breweries to be more local in those markets. You guys are at Boston Beer, putting some kind of a focus on local. The trend is there. Everything is really trending local, and yet it sounds like it's still sort of a very small piece of the big picture, and just kind of one extra thing that you guys have to do, a card into the game, as you said. So how much focus do you give it, and how much focus do you give the other pieces of the business?
You talking to me?
I'm talking to everyone.
You know, when I think about it, I think about like even you mentioned Anheuser or Boosh, but like Chicago, for example, this is our market. I know the most about we sell 95% of our beer in the great Chicago area, northern Illinois here. And for a long time, you know, there was Goose Island as the craft brewery, and even before Goose Island, we didn't have we're a huge big city, but we didn't have a Chicago brewery. Milwaukee had all the great beer, and it came from there. It came, Old Style was the Chicago brand that got brought up earlier, and it came from La Crosse. And then Goose came and created this local brewery thing, and it was huge. They were the ones who succeeded doing that thing for a very long time, not just right now, for 20, plus years. And so, when they got bought by Anheuser-Busch, there was a bit of a vacuum for that. We stepped in. We're not the only ones. There's a handful of breweries, John included, Half Acre, others that are being rewarded or getting an entree to the market, this great, huge market we have here because of that local card, if you want. And the ones that succeed, that people are going to buy again, are the ones with the great taste in beer. And so I think for us, the thing happening here is this vacuum. What a huge big city without a lot of local breweries for many years, even national crafts. I think Chicago was a great target market for many national crafts. Dan from IRI was talking about how the nationals are doing relatively, and especially in this market, they owned, with the exception of Goose Island, it was even like the Michigan breweries. Bell's was coming into Chicago, was a huge market for them for such a long time, and they were able to build their business off of that. Now they're going everywhere with great beer that they make. So that's just kind of the story that we have here. Other places were more dominated by brewers for the size of the city they had, and I still think there's opportunity in all kinds of markets for that. There's plenty of markets left without a really big dominant brewer, and there's room for people to grow their businesses.
John, are you more focused on what's happening outside of Chicago than you are what's happening here?
Yeah, honestly, we try not to pay a lot of attention to what other breweries in Chicago are doing. Again, this is all very self-indulgent for us, but it honestly is who we are. We tend to look at, there are a few breweries around the world which I find really engaging. A lot of them, for me, are working with native and indigenous yeast strains. And those are the breweries that I try to find inspiration from and really focus on. But again, we're not trying to sell 80, 100,000 barrels of beer. It's just a completely different business model.
Right. You're the guy who's not local in so many different places. What have you learned from that experience being
that there's
the outsider?
Huge opportunity there. For us, there's giant opportunity there. I think, as you're alluding to, if your only marketing pitch, your only reason why people are going to drink your beer is you're local, then you're pleading with them to support you. It's a lazy, increasingly ineffectual strategy. There's 30 other breweries. We had a distributor who wanted to put up signs saying how far away the bar was from our brewery. Like, I don't want that at all, because it turns local into a pissing match. It's like, well, Kohl's is right across the street from there, so it's 0.001 miles. So sweet, I'm gonna go drink. Like, that just doesn't make any sense to me. So for us, just almost like a lamprey on a shark. Like, we're just riding this current that other people are creating, and we're finding the opportunity where people they love their local beers, but still, I go to the bar and I'll drink 4 local beers. The 5th beer, I want to be something new, something different, something that I don't get exposed to every day. I still like drinking beers from Belgium. I still like drinking beers from small little breweries in France. Those aren't local at all. I love them because they aren't local.
Right. Well, we've certainly touched on a lot of different topics, and I think I gotta believe that the audience question thing that I have here is broken, because it says 932 new questions. I mean, that would be the most successful Brewbound session ever. So I gotta believe something's going on here. But and I'm not joking. It says 932. But one final question for all you guys. As we consider the long-term future of craft, and just sort of how international craft is really become. There's so much opportunity internationally. Everything's kind of exploded. Talk to me a bit about how you guys are going to evaluate the long-term play for each of your businesses, and how you're going to balance local and those global opportunities as things move forward.
I guess I'll start, and I think it's important to note that just because like John, for example, has a very different business model than I do, and we're not sending our beer to lots of places right now, doesn't mean that, A, we don't reserve the right to do that later. We're choosing to sell our beer locally because we can. I'm at max capacity this summer. There are retailers in the room who are not getting half the amount of our beer that they would like to get this summer. And that's just the reality that we deal with. And so we prioritize our existing customers no matter where they are, even our customers in Ohio that we're selling. And so before going somewhere else, and it's kind of pursuing opportunities for the sake of it. We've sent a couple pallets of beer to Japan just for fun. So we can, see our beer in a Japanese magazine kind of thing, It was really just for fun, And it's like, sure, why not? But it's not sustainable currently for us. But I think, we're open to it at some point, but we don't need to.
So when the time comes, when it feels right, you'll potentially capitalize on some opportunities.
There's talk about opening up markets, and this is a fun thing for some of the other brewery owners in the room. Something, people have given me advice, you should open up markets in the places that you want to travel and you want to go, where you want to spend your dollars, but it's true. It's any market you open is an investment. We're likely going to hire a staff person in a major market that we open, and I'm going to go visit there, 4 or 6 times a year. We're going to buy some airplane miles there, spend some money on hotels there. You're going to have some free time to do other things. I think, is that our motivating strategy? No, it's clearly not. We're selling 95% of our beer here.
Right.
And I want to travel elsewhere. But it's an opportunity. I think it's a huge opportunity. And I think once this market gets a little tighter and we start to see the growth curves slimming down a little bit, then people will start to go elsewhere.
Alan and John, balancing localness with the global explosion of craft.
For us, our main focus is always on trying to make new and interesting beers. When it makes sense to tell that story locally, great. There are certainly times that we do that. When it makes sense to ignore that completely, then we do that. So.
I haven't given it a moment's thought. I haven't. I see what's going on internationally. It fascinates me. I saw it coming. One of my great fantasies when I was still at Magic Hat was my retirement was going to be, I was going to let somebody run Magic Hat in North America, and I was going to go live in Europe, and I was going to go spread the Magic Hat gospel. Well, that didn't exactly work out. I'm now back to where I started, which is building local, and I'm just not smart enough to be able to think that far ahead. I've really never been able to think very far ahead. I kind of respond to what I'm feeling like and what I'm seeing, and I've been lucky enough in a number of different industries over a 30, 40-year period to have been in the right place at the right time. I think the right place at the right time today would be paying much more attention to international. I think international is about to explode, but it's going to have to be done by people younger than me because I'm really focused on what I'm doing right now.
All right. Well, some of the new brewers in the audience, maybe they'll go do that on your behalf.
I'm a fan, just to be, I like deep. I've always been a fan of, stay as tight as you can. It's always easier, in my opinion, to sell beer closer than further away. And so it's just not part of my thinking at the moment. If all of a sudden I were to get the level of not just sales, but enthusiasm in the local market, I would then start looking beyond that. But we're not there yet. We still have a lot of work to do to build the kind of community in our local markets and to build the relationship in our local markets. So I'm just not looking international today.
All right. Well, there you have it, the story on local. Thanks, guys. Cheers. John, Alan.
Hey, Chris.